My name is Sarah. I used to be their entertainment, until I became their regret. The laughter still echoes in my mind, sharp and cutting like broken glass against my skin. It wasn't the kind of laughter that brings families together around dinner, tables, or creates warm memories. This was different. This was the sound of dreams being murdered in real time, executed by the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Here she comes with another one of her crazy ideas, my brother Marcus would announce whenever I walked into a room, his voice dripping with that particular brand of condescension reserved for the family disappointment. He'd lean back in his chair, arms crossed, wearing that smirk that said he knew something I didn't, that I was destined to fail, and everyone could see it but me. My Aunt Linda was worse. She had this way of tilting her head and sighing whenever I mentioned my plans, like she was watching a child insist that Santa Claus was real. "Sweetheart," she'd say, her voice sickeningly sweet. "You need to grow up and get a job that actually exists. This whole tech thing is just a phase. You can't build a career on fantasies." But it was my mother's silence that cut deepest, while the others laughed and mocked. She would just look down at her plate, pushing food around with her fork, saying nothing. Her silence was louder than their ridicule. It was confirmation that even she, the woman who gave me life, couldn't muster enough faith in me to defend my dreams. Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching, how many dreamers are out there listening to this in the quiet hours when doubt feels heaviest. Every family gathering became a performance I didn't audition for. I'd walk through the front door of my childhood home and immediately feel the shift in energy. Conversations would pause. Eyes would meet across the room in that knowing way that said, "Here we go again." Someone would inevitably ask what I was up to these days, and I'd make the mistake of sharing my progress, my vision for a platform, where people could truly connect, where voices that had been silenced could finally be heard. "So it's like Facebook?" My cousin Janet would interrupt, not really asking, just dismissing. "No, it's different. It's about authentic connection, about..." "Right, so it's like Instagram but with more words?" Marcus would chime in, and the whole table would erupt in that familiar chorus of mockery. I stopped trying to explain. How do you describe building something from nothing to people who've never risked anything? How do you explain the fire that burns in your chest at 3 a.m. when you're debugging code that nobody believes in? How do you make them understand that every impossible they threw at me only made me more determined to prove them wrong? The worst part wasn't their disbelief. It was their certainty that they were protecting me from inevitable disappointment. They genuinely thought their cruelty was kindness, that crushing my spirit now would save me from a bigger heartbreak later. They saw my dedication as delusion, my persistence as pathetic, stubborn pride. I remember one particular Christmas dinner when Uncle Robert, emboldened by too much wine, decided to stage what he probably thought was an intervention. "Sarah, honey, we're all worried about you. You're 28 years old, living in that tiny apartment, working those dead-end jobs to support this hobby. When are you going to face reality?" The table went quiet. Everyone stared at me, waiting for my response, their faces a mixture of pity and expectation. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to admit defeat, to thank them for opening my eyes, to laugh along with them at my own foolishness. Instead, I set down my fork, looked around the table at these people who shared my blood but not my vision, and said quietly, "Reality is what you make it. I'm making mine." The silence that followed was different from my mother's. This was the silence of people who didn't know what to do with someone who refused to be saved from herself. After that night, the invitations became less frequent. The phone calls stopped altogether. I wasn't officially exiled, but I wasn't exactly welcomed either. I existed in the gray space between belonging and banishment, acknowledged but not accepted, included but not embraced. That's when I learned to work in silence. My bedroom became my headquarters, my laptop my closest confidant. While my family gathered for birthdays and holidays without me, I was building something they couldn't see, couldn't understand, couldn't diminish with their laughter. Every line of code was an act of defiance. Every late night was a declaration of independence. Every small breakthrough was a whispered promise to myself. They don't have to believe in it. I do. The loneliness was crushing some days. I'd scroll through social media and see photos of my cousins at family barbecues, my brother's kids blowing out birthday candles, my parents celebrating anniversaries, all the moments I was absent from, all the memories being made without me. But then, I'd look at my screen, at the interface taking shape pixel by pixel, at the user experience flowing like poetry, and I'd remember why I was choosing this isolation. I wasn't just building an app. I was building myself. The learning curve was brutal. I taught myself Python, then JavaScript, then React. I watched YouTube tutorials until my eyes burned. I read documentation like scripture. I failed more times than I succeeded. But each failure taught me something new, showed me a path I hadn't considered, revealed a strength I didn't know I possessed. Slowly, quietly, the prototype began to take shape. It wasn't beautiful yet. The interface was clunky, the features limited. But it worked. It actually worked. You could create a profile, share thoughts, connect with others in ways that felt genuine rather than performative. It was everything I'd envisioned, and nothing like what already existed. But I told no one. Not my family, not my friends, not even my coworkers at the marketing firm where I worked part-time to pay the bills. I'd learned that dreams are fragile things, easily shattered by the wrong word at the wrong moment. So I protected this one like a mother protects her child, keeping it safe from the people who had already proven they couldn't be trusted with my hope. Then Dr. Patricia Williams changed everything. She'd been my computer science professor in college, the one who'd seen something in me that I'd barely seen in myself. When she reached out 3 years after graduation, I almost didn't respond. What did a respected academic want with someone who'd never amounted to anything? "I've been thinking about your senior project," she wrote in her email. "The one about authentic digital connection. I have someone I'd like you to meet." That someone was David Chen, a venture capitalist who specialized in early-stage social platforms. The meeting was supposed to last 10 minutes, just a courtesy call for Dr. Williams, really. I almost canceled 3 times. What was the point of pitching to someone who'd probably see right through me, who'd recognize immediately that I was just another dreamer without the credentials to back up the vision? But something made me show up to that Zoom call. Maybe it was exhaustion from carrying the secret alone. Maybe it was the weight of all those family dinners where I'd been the punchline. Maybe it was just time. David listened. Actually listened. He asked questions that showed he understood not just what I was building, but why. He saw the gap in the market I was trying to fill, the human need I was trying to address. When I finished my presentation, he was quiet for a long moment. "How much do you need to take this to beta?" he finally asked. The number I gave him was small, pathetically small by Silicon Valley standards. $50,000. Enough to quit my part-time job, rent proper server space, maybe hire a designer to make the interface less embarrassing. He transferred $75,000 the next day. I cried in the shower that night, letting the water wash away years of doubt and humiliation. For the first time since that Christmas dinner confrontation, I wasn't alone with my dream. Someone else believed in it. Someone else saw what I saw. But I still didn't tell my family. The wounds were too fresh, the trust too broken. I'd learned to protect my victories the same way I'd learned to protect my dreams, by keeping them close, keeping them safe, keeping them mine. The months that followed were a blur of 18-hour days and small victories. I found a co-founder, Lisa, a brilliant designer who understood that aesthetics were just as important as functionality. We hired 2 developers, both of them young, and hungry and willing to work for equity and the promise of something bigger than themselves. We called it Lighthouse. a platform where people could share their authentic selves without the performance, the curation, the desperate scramble for likes and follows that had poisoned every other social space. It was about real connection, genuine community, the kind of belonging I'd been searching for my whole life. The beta launch was quiet. We had maybe 200 users, mostly friends of friends, early adopters who were as tired of performative social media as we were. The engagement was good, better than good actually, but the growth was slow, organic, the kind of steady progress that builds sustainable communities rather than viral moments. I was okay with that. I'd learned patience in those lonely months of building in secret. I understood that real things take time, that authentic connections can't be rushed or manufactured. We were building something that would last, not something that would explode and burn out. Then something unexpected happened. It started with a single post from one of our users, a woman named Maria who'd been struggling with anxiety and depression. She shared her story, not the sanitized, inspirational version you see on Instagram, but the raw, honest truth of what it felt like to wake up every day and choose to keep going. The vulnerability was breathtaking. The response was immediate. Other users began sharing their own stories, real stories, the kind of authentic, unfiltered truth that had been squeezed out of social media by algorithms that rewarded controversy over connection. Our little platform became a place where people could be human again, where pain was acknowledged rather than hidden, where triumph was celebrated without comparison. Someone screenshotted Maria's post and shared it on Twitter, with the caption, "This is what social media could be if we weren't all performing for each other." The thread exploded. Thousands of retweets, hundreds of comments from people desperate for the kind of authentic community we'd built. Then, TikTok creators discovered us. They made videos about the app that's bringing back real connection, about finally finding a social platform that doesn't make you hate yourself. The hashtag Thalster Lighthouse app started trending. Our servers crashed twice in 12 hours. I sat in my apartment at 3 a.m, watching the user numbers climb in real time, barely believing what I was seeing. 20,000 new signups in 6 hours, 50,000 by dawn. The thing I'd built in secret, protected like a fragile seedling from the harsh winds of family judgment, was growing into something I'd never imagined possible. Lisa called me, breathless with excitement. "Sarah, we need to talk about scaling. This isn't a beta anymore. This is real. Real." The word my family had thrown at me like a weapon was finally mine to claim. But success, I learned, has a way of changing people's memories. Suddenly, the same relatives who'd mocked my impossible dreams developed an interesting case of selective amnesia. The first text came from my cousin Janet, the one who'd compared my vision to Instagram with more words. "Hey stranger, just saw the article about Lighthouse and TechCrunch. So proud of you. We should catch up soon." Proud. The word felt foreign coming from her, like hearing a song in a language I'd never learned. Then Marcus called. My brother, who'd introduced me as the family comedian for years, was suddenly speaking in the careful, measured tones of someone who'd realized they'd made a terrible miscalculation. "Sarah, I've been thinking. You know I've always supported your dreams, right? I think my business development experience could really help Lighthouse reach the next level." I listened to his voice through the phone, remembering every eye roll, every dismissive laugh, every time he'd made me feel small for daring to dream beyond what he could understand. He was rewriting history in real time, and he expected me to forget everything that had come before. "I'm actually pretty busy right now," I said quietly. "But thanks for the call." The emails started arriving daily. Uncle Robert, who'd staged that Christmas intervention, wanted to discuss potential investment opportunities. Aunt Linda, who told me to get a real job, was suddenly interested in exploring synergies with her marketing firm. Even my mother, who'd never once asked about my work during those silent years, sent a message asking if we could talk about family involvement in the company. Family involvement. As if they'd ever been involved in anything but tearing me down. The most painful message came from my father. We'd barely spoken since that Christmas dinner 3 years ago, our relationship reduced to obligatory birthday texts and awkward small talk at the few family events I still attended. His email was longer than any conversation we'd had in years. Sarah, I want you to know how proud your mother and I are of what you've accomplished. We always knew you were special, even when we worried about the path you were taking. I think there might be opportunities for the family to support Lighthouse's growth, and I'd love to discuss how we can help you succeed. Always knew I was special. The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. I printed that email and pinned it to the wall of our new office, not as inspiration, but as a reminder. A reminder of how quickly people can rewrite the past when the present becomes profitable. A reminder of why I'd learned to protect my dreams from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The office itself was a symbol of everything they'd said was impossible. We'd moved out of my apartment and into a real space in the tech district, with glass walls and modern furniture, and a view of the city skyline. The Lighthouse logo glowed softly on the frosted glass doors, visible from the hallway like a beacon of everything I'd built without them. Our team had grown to 15 people, all of them brilliant and passionate and committed to the vision they'd once laughed at. We were featured in magazines, invited to conferences, courted by major investors who saw in Lighthouse something the social media giants had lost: authenticity. But success brought its own challenges. The attention was overwhelming sometimes. Reporters wanted to know my story, how I'd built something so successful at such a young age. They wanted the narrative of the scrappy underdog who'd overcome the odds through determination and vision. I gave them a version of that story, but I never mentioned my family's role in it, never spoke about the years of ridicule and dismissal that had forged my determination. Some wounds are too personal to share with strangers, too sacred to reduce to sound bites. The breakthrough moment came 6 months after our viral explosion, at the annual Tech Innovation Awards. Lighthouse had been nominated for Platform of the Year, competing against companies with $100 million valuations and decades of industry experience. I almost didn't go to the ceremony. Imposter syndrome is a powerful thing, and despite everything we'd achieved, part of me still heard my family's voices telling me I was reaching too high, dreaming too big, setting myself up for inevitable disappointment. But Lisa convinced me. "You built this," she said, straightening my dress in the hotel mirror before the ceremony. "You deserve to be here. You deserve to win." The ballroom was filled with tech industry legends, venture capitalists, journalists, all the people who shaped the digital landscape. I sat at our table, surrounded by my team, feeling like an outsider who'd somehow snuck into the inner circle. When they announced the nominees for Platform of the Year, I closed my eyes and tried to calm my racing heart. The presenter opened the envelope, paused for dramatic effect, and spoke the words that changed everything. "The winner is Lighthouse for revolutionizing authentic social connection." The applause was thunderous. My team erupted in celebration, hugging and crying and cheering. But I sat frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. We'd won. The thing they'd mocked, the dream they'd tried to kill, had been recognized by the industry as innovative, important, worthy. I walked to the stage, on unsteady legs, accepted the award with trembling hands, and looked out at an audience of people who understood what we'd built, who saw the value in what my family had called impossible. My acceptance speech was brief. I thanked my team, our users, Dr. Williams for believing in me when belief was scarce. But I didn't thank my family. How could I? They'd been obstacles to overcome, not supporters to acknowledge. The next morning, my phone exploded with congratulations. Messages from industry leaders, interview requests from major publications, investment offers that would have seemed impossible just a year before. And buried among them, the predictable messages from my relatives, each one claiming credit for my success in increasingly creative ways. "We always knew you'd make it big," from Janet. "So proud to see our little entrepreneur winning awards," from Uncle Robert. The whole family is celebrating your success, from Aunt Linda. But it was my mother's message that broke something inside me. Sweetheart, we saw the ceremony online. Your father and I were crying with joy. We've always believed in you, even when we couldn't find the right words to show it. We love you so much, and we're so proud to be your parents. Can we take you to dinner to celebrate? Always believed in me. The gaslighting was complete. I read that message 3 times, feeling the familiar anger rise in my chest, the same fury that had sustained me through those lonely years of building in silence. They wanted to rewrite history, to claim a share of victory they'd never supported, to position themselves as loving parents who'd simply been misunderstood. But then something shifted. Sitting in my office, surrounded by the evidence of what I'd accomplished despite them, I realized something profound. Their approval no longer mattered. For years I'd been carrying their rejection like a wound, letting their dismissal fuel my determination, but also poison my joy. I'd been building Lighthouse not just to connect others, but to prove something to people who'd never been worthy of the proof. I looked around the office, at the team working passionately on features that would help millions of people connect, more authentically, at the wall of user testimonials from people whose lives had been changed by the platform we'd created, at the award gleaming on my desk in the afternoon sunlight. This was real. This was mine, and it had nothing to do with them. I deleted their messages without responding. Not out of anger, but out of indifference. They'd had their chance to be part of my journey when it mattered, when support would have meant something. Now their approval was just noise, their pride just an attempt to bask in reflected glory they'd never helped create. Months passed. The messages from family grew less frequent, then stopped altogether. They'd probably moved on to the next family member to either mock or claim credit for, depending on how things turned out. It didn't matter to me anymore. Lighthouse continued to grow. We launched new features, expanded internationally, built partnerships with organizations working to combat loneliness and depression. Every day brought new stories from users who'd found genuine community on our platform, who'd discovered they weren't alone in their struggles, who'd been inspired to share their authentic selves because they'd found a safe space to do so. That's what mattered. Not the relatives who'd tried to clip my wings before I learned to fly, but the millions of people who were finding connection and healing through something I'd built with my own hands and heart. One evening, working late in the office as I often did, I stood by the window looking out at the city lights. The Lighthouse logo reflected in the glass, superimposed over the skyline like a promise kept. I thought about that young woman who'd sat in her childhood bedroom, laptop balanced on her knees, building something she believed in while the people who were supposed to love her laughed at the impossibility of it all. I wished I could go back and tell her what I knew now, that their laughter wasn't a verdict on her dreams, but a reflection of their own limitations, that the silence she'd learned to work in would become her greatest strength, that the family who couldn't see her vision would one day desperately want to claim it, but by then, she wouldn't need them to validate what she'd already validated for herself. I pulled out my phone and opened a new note, typing words I'd been carrying in my heart for years. They laughed at the seed because they could only see the dirt, but I planted it anyway, watered it with my tears, and watched it grow in the darkness they created around me. Now they want to sit in the shade of what they tried to kill, but some trees only grow strong roots in solitude. I saved the note and put my phone away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help people connect authentically in a world that often felt increasingly isolated. But tonight, in the quiet of my office, surrounded by the fruits of dreams they'd called impossible, I finally understood the most important truth of all. You only believe in the fruit. I believed in the seed.